In a quiet little town surrounded by gentle hills and vast fields of golden wheat, there lived a woman named Clara. She was known to everyone in the area, not because she was famous or wealthy, but because of her simple and unassuming nature. Clara's days were spent tending to her small garden, which grew vegetables that she sold at the local market. Every morning, she would wake up before sunrise, put on her worn-out cotton dress, and walk barefoot to the market with a basket balanced carefully on her head. Her hands were calloused from years of hard work, and her face bore the marks of long days under the sun, but her smile was warm and genuine. The townsfolk liked Clara. They admired her kindness and appreciated how she always greeted them with a cheerful good morning or offered advice when they needed help. But despite their fondness for her, many couldn't help but think of her as plain. To them, Clara seemed like someone who had no ambitions beyond her daily routine. She didn't own fancy clothes, rarely attended social gatherings, and lived in a modest cottage at the edge of the village. The house itself was charming in its own way, surrounded by wildflowers and tall oak trees, but it lacked the grandeur of the homes owned by wealthier families in town. People often whispered about her, wondering why she chose such a simple life, when she could have done more with herself. What the townsfolk didn't know, and what Clara never mentioned, was that her humble lifestyle was a choice, not a necessity. Clara came from a family that valued hard work and humility above all else. Her parents had taught her the importance of being content with what she had, rather than chasing material possessions. From a young age, Clara learned to find joy in the little things: the sound of birds chirping in the morning, the smell of fresh earth after rain, and the laughter of children playing in the streets. These moments brought her happiness, and she saw no reason to complicate her life with unnecessary luxuries. Despite her contentment, Clara wasn't immune to judgment. Some people in the town thought she was strange for refusing to conform to societal expectations. Women her age were expected to marry well, wear fine jewelry, and host elaborate dinner parties. Yet here was Clara, living alone in her cottage, spending her evenings reading books by candlelight instead of mingling with the elite. It baffled many, and some even pitied her, believing she must feel lonely or trapped by her circumstances. But Clara never felt sorry for herself. If anything, she pitied those who spent their lives chasing empty dreams only to end up feeling unsatisfied. One day, something unusual happened that would change Clara's life forever. An invitation arrived at her doorstep, delivered by a courier, in a crisp uniform. The envelope was thick and elegant, embossed with gold lettering that shimmered in the sunlight. Clara stared at it for a moment, puzzled. She couldn't remember the last time she had received mail, let alone something so extravagant. Carefully, she opened the envelope and pulled out the card inside. It was an invitation to a grand gala hosted by one of the wealthiest families in the country. The event was set to take place in the city, miles away from her quiet little town, and promised to be a night filled with luxury, music, and high-profile guests. Clara read the invitation several times, trying to make sense of it. Why would someone invite her to such an exclusive event? She had no connections to the elite circles and certainly didn't move in the same social circles as the hosts. As far as she knew, she had nothing in common with the people who would attend the gala. Still, curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to accept the invitation. Perhaps it was fate knocking on her door, or maybe it was simply a mistake. Either way, Clara felt compelled to see where this unexpected opportunity might lead. News of Clara's invitation quickly spread through the town. At first, people thought it was a prank. After all, Clara wasn't exactly the type of person who belonged at a glamorous event attended by millionaires and celebrities. When they realized it was real, however, the reaction shifted from disbelief to mockery. Gossip traveled fast, and soon everyone was talking about how absurd it was for someone like Clara to attend such a prestigious gathering. Some laughed openly, imagining her walking into the opulent ballroom wearing her usual cotton dress and carrying her woven basket. Others whispered cruel remarks, speculating that she must have begged for the invitation or bribed someone to get. But Clara paid no attention to the whispers. She went about her daily routine as if nothing had changed, continuing to tend to her garden and sell vegetables at the market. Inside, though, She felt a mix of emotions. Part of her wondered if the townsfolk were right, if she truly didn't belong at the gala. Another part of her, however, was excited by the idea of stepping outside her comfort zone and experiencing something completely new. For once, she allowed herself to dream of what the evening might hold. What would it be like to walk among the rich and powerful? Would she feel out of place, or would she discover that people weren't so different from one another after all? As the date of the gala approached, Clara began preparing for the trip. She borrowed a simple yet elegant dress from a neighbor, brushed her hair until it shone, and polished an old pair of shoes she hadn't worn in years. She didn't own any jewelry, but she picked a few wildflowers from her garden and wove them into her hair, creating a crown that suited her natural beauty. On the morning of the event, she packed a small bag with essentials and set off for the city, leaving behind the familiar sights and sounds of her beloved town. The journey was long, and Clara spent most of it gazing out the window of the bus, watching the landscape transform from rolling hills to towering skyscrapers. By the time she reached the city, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the streets. She followed the directions written on the invitation until she arrived at the venue, a magnificent mansion surrounded by manicured lawns and sparkling fountains. As she stood outside, taking in the sight, Clara felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest. This world was so different from hers, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. Taking a deep breath, Clara stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Little did she know, this night would mark the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and the people around her. While the elites inside the mansion prepared to laugh at the peasant who dared to enter their world, none of them could have predicted the truth waiting to be revealed. And Clara, with her quiet strength and unwavering dignity, was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. When Clara entered the grand mansion, she felt as though she had stepped into another world. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, and the sound of classical music floated through the air. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft light over the elegantly dressed guests who mingled below. Women wore gowns adorned with jewels, and men stood in tailored suits, their watches glinting under the lights. Servers moved gracefully through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was a scene unlike anything Clara had ever experienced. At first, no one noticed her arrival. She slipped quietly into the room, her simple dress and wildflower crown making her look out of place among the glittering crowd. But it didn't take long for people to spot her. A few heads turned, then more, until whispers began to ripple through the room like waves. Some laughed behind their hands, pointing at her modest appearance. Others exchanged knowing glances, amused by the idea that someone so plain had somehow ended up at such an exclusive event. Clara could feel their stares, but she kept her chin up and walked forward calmly, as if she belonged there just as much as anyone else. It wasn't long before Richard, one of the wealthiest and most arrogant men in the room, decided to make a spectacle of her. He was tall and handsome, with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. Known for his confidence and often his cruelty, he took pleasure in mocking those he considered beneath him. When he saw Clara standing near the edge of the room sipping a glass of water, he smirked and made his way toward her. His friends followed close behind, eager to see what kind of entertainment he would provide. "Well, well," Richard said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Look who we have here. Aren't you the peasant everyone's been talking about?" His voice dripped with sarcasm, and his friends chuckled nervously, unsure whether to join in or step back. Clara turned to face him, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her expression remained calm, though her heart was pounding in her chest. She had expected judgment, but hearing it spoken aloud still stung. "I'm not sure what you mean," Clara replied softly, her tone polite but firm. "I'm just a guest like everyone else." Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her response. "A guest? Really? That's funny, because you don't exactly look like the type of person who belongs here." He gestured to her dress, which was far simpler than the designer gowns worn by the other women. "Did you borrow that from your grandmother?" The comment drew laughter from the group around him, and some of the nearby guests turned to watch the exchange. Clara could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but she refused to let him see how much his words affected her. Instead, she smiled faintly and said, "Clothes don't determine where someone belongs. Maybe I belong here more than you think." Her answer caught Richard off guard. He hadn't expected her to stand up to him so confidently. For a moment he hesitated, searching for a way to regain control of the situation. Then with a smug grin he leaned closer and said, "Oh really? Prove it. Tell me, Clara, what exactly do you bring to this table? What makes you special enough to be here?" The room fell silent as everyone waited for her reply. Clara looked around at the sea of faces watching her, some curious, others mocking. She knew they were waiting for her to stumble, to reveal herself as the outsider they believed her to be. But instead of shrinking away, she straightened her posture and met Richard's gaze head-on. "Perhaps I don't measure wealth the same way you do," she said evenly. "Maybe my value isn't something you can see or understand." Her words sent a murmur through the crowd. Some people nodded thoughtfully while others rolled their eyes, dismissing her statement as nonsense. Richard, however, wasn't satisfied. He crossed his arms and gave her a challenging look. "That's a nice little speech," he said, "but let's be honest. You're here because someone felt sorry for you, right? Or maybe you tricked your way onto the guest list. Either way, you're out of your depth." Clara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a slow sip of water, buying herself time to think. She could feel the weight of everyone's attention on her, and she knew this was a pivotal moment. If she backed down now, she would confirm everything they thought about her, that she was weak, insignificant, and unworthy of their respect. But if she stood her ground, she might just surprise them all. Finally, she set her glass down and looked directly at Richard. "You're entitled to your opinion," she said, her voice steady. "But I'll tell you this. True worth isn't measured by what you wear or how much money you have. It's about the choices you make and the impact you leave on the world. And if you judge me based solely on appearances, then maybe you're the one who's missing the bigger picture." Her response stunned the room into silence. No one had expected Clara to speak with such clarity and conviction. Even Richard seemed taken aback, though he quickly masked his surprise with a dismissive laugh. "Very poetic," he said, clapping his hands mockingly. "But words are cheap. Let's see if you can back them up." Before Clara could respond, a woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was older, with silver hair styled perfectly and a gown that shimmered like moonlight. Her presence commanded attention, and when she spoke, her voice carried authority. "Enough, Richard," she said sharply. "Leave the poor girl alone. Can't you see she's done nothing to deserve your ridicule?" Richard frowned, clearly, annoyed by the interruption. "Mother," he began, but the woman cut him off with a wave of her hand. "She's our guest," she continued, turning to Clara with a warm smile. "And we should treat her with respect, regardless of where she comes from. Now, why don't you introduce yourself properly, dear? We'd love to know more about you." Clara blinked, surprised by the sudden change in tone. She glanced at Richard, who looked furious but didn't dare argue with his mother. Taking a deep breath, she nodded and began speaking. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Clara, and I come from a small town not far from here. I grow vegetables and sell them at the market. It's a simple life, but it's fulfilling. I believe in kindness, hard work, and helping others whenever I can." As she spoke, she noticed something remarkable happening. The skeptical expressions on the faces of the elites began to soften. Some people nodded approvingly, while others whispered to each other, impressed by her sincerity. Even Richard, though still scowling, seemed less hostile than before. By the end of the evening, Clara had won over many of the guests, not with wealth or status, but with her quiet strength and genuine nature. Though the night had started with mockery and disdain, it ended with curiosity and admiration. Little did anyone know the real revelation was yet to come. Clara's story was far from over, and the truth about her past would soon shake the foundations of everything they thought. They knew. The gala continued late into the night, with music playing softly in the background and guests chatting over glasses of champagne. Clara found herself surrounded by a small group of people who had taken an interest in her story. They asked questions about her life in the village, her garden, and the simple joys she described. At first, their curiosity felt genuine, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that some of them were only pretending to care. She could see it in their eyes, the same judgment she'd noticed earlier, hidden behind polite smiles. Despite this, Clara answered their questions honestly. She spoke about how much she loved waking up early to tend to her plants, how the smell of fresh soil reminded her of her childhood, and how she enjoyed sharing her vegetables with neighbors. Her words painted a picture of a life that was peaceful and meaningful, even if it lacked the glamour they were used to. Some of the guests seemed genuinely fascinated, while others nodded politely, clearly unimpressed. Richard, however, remained silent, watching her from across the room with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. As the clock struck midnight, a man approached Clara. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, his hair neatly combed, and he carried himself with an air of authority. "Miss Clara," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Thomas Whitmore. I hope you're enjoying your evening." Clara shook his hand, recognizing the name immediately. Thomas Whitmore was one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, known for his vast wealth and influence. He wasn't someone she expected to speak to her directly, let alone introduce himself. "I'm honored to meet you, Mr. Whitmore," Clara replied, keeping her tone respectful but calm. "Thank you for inviting me tonight." Thomas smiled warmly, though there was a flicker of something else in his expression, something like intrigue. "Actually, Miss Clara, I didn't send the invitation. My assistant did. But now that you're here, I must admit I'm curious. How did someone like you end up on our guest list?" His question caught Clara off guard, but she managed to keep her composure. "To be honest, I'm not sure myself," she admitted. "But I decided to come because I thought it might be interesting to step outside my usual routine." Thomas chuckled softly, clearly amused by her honesty. "Well, you've certainly made an impression tonight," he said. "Not many people would stand up to Richard the way you did earlier. That took courage." Clara shrugged modestly. "It's easy to speak the truth when you have nothing to lose." Her response seemed to resonate with Thomas, who studied her carefully for a moment before speaking again. "You know, Miss Clara, sometimes the simplest lives hold the greatest treasures. I think we could all learn a thing or two from your perspective." Before Clara could respond, another man joined them, a lawyer named Mr. Grayson who worked closely with Thomas. He was older, with thinning gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. After exchanging pleasantries, Mr. Grayson turned to Clara and said, "Forgive me for interrupting, but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. You mentioned living a simple life, yet you carry yourself with a quiet confidence that suggests there's more to your story than meets the eye." Clara hesitated, unsure how to respond. She hadn't planned to reveal anything about her past, especially not to strangers. But there was something about Mr. Grayson's tone that made her feel uneasy, as if he already knew something she didn't want him to. "I suppose everyone has secrets," she said finally, choosing her words carefully. Mr. Grayson's lips curled into a faint smile. "Indeed they do," he agreed. "But some secrets are harder to keep than others." The comment lingered in the air, leaving Clara unsettled. Before she could ask what he meant, Thomas excused himself, saying he needed to attend to other guests. Left alone with Mr. Grayson, Clara felt a sudden urge to leave the conversation. There was something about him that made her skin prickle, as though he were testing her, probing for weaknesses. Sensing her discomfort, Mr. Grayson gave her a reassuring nod. "Don't worry, Miss Clara," he said. "I didn't mean to pry. Sometimes old habits die hard." With that, he walked away, leaving Clara standing by herself. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The evening had been overwhelming, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could endure the constant scrutiny. Just as she was considering making her exit, a server approached her with a folded note on a silver tray. "This is for you, miss," he said, bowing slightly. Clara accepted the note, confused. Who would be sending her a message? She unfolded it carefully and read the brief message inside. "Please join me in the library upstairs. It's important." The note was unsigned, but the handwriting was neat and precise. For a moment, Clara debated whether to ignore it. She was tired and ready to go home, but something about the urgency of the words compelled her to investigate. Following the directions given by a nearby staff member, Clara climbed the grand staircase to the second floor. The mansion was eerily quiet up there, the sounds of the party fading into a distant hum. She found the library easily. It was a large room filled with towering shelves of books, leather chairs, and a roaring fireplace. Standing near the fire was a woman in her 60s dressed in an elegant gown and holding a glass of wine. When she saw Clara, she set the glass down and smiled warmly. "Ah, Clara," she said, stepping forward. "I'm so glad you came. Please sit." Clara hesitated, unsure who this woman was or why she had summoned her. "Who are you?" she asked cautiously. "My name is Eleanor Langford," the woman replied. "I'm the executor of the estate of Jonathan Hartley. Does that name mean anything to you?" Clara froze, her heart skipping a beat. Jonathan Hartley. The name sent a jolt through her, stirring memories she had buried long ago. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years, and yet it was impossible to forget. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He was my uncle." Eleanor nodded as if confirming something she already knew. "That's correct. And according to his will, you are the sole beneficiary of his fortune." For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. Her mind raced, trying to process what she had just heard. Uncle Jonathan had disappeared from her life when she was a child, leaving behind only vague stories and unanswered questions. No one in her family had ever mentioned him after that, not even her parents. Over time, Clara had convinced herself that he was gone for good, a shadowy figure from her past, best left forgotten. Now, standing in this opulent library, she realized the truth was far more complicated than she had imagined. "I don't understand," Clara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would he leave everything to me?" Eleanor sighed, her expression softening. "Jonathan always admired your humility and strength," she explained. "He believed you were the kind of person who would use his wealth wisely, to help others rather than indulge yourself. In his will, he wrote that he trusted you to honor his legacy." Clara sank into one of the chairs, overwhelmed by the weight of what she had just learned. The fortune included sprawling estates, priceless art collections, shares in multinational corporations, and billions in cash assets. Overnight, she had become one of the richest individuals in the world. Yet instead of excitement, she felt a deep sense of responsibility and fear. What would happen now? How would her life change? And most importantly, how would the people downstairs react when they found out? As if reading her thoughts, Eleanor placed a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder. "Take your time to process this," she said gently. "But remember, true wealth isn't measured by money. It's measured by the choices you make and the lives you touch." Clara nodded, grateful for the reassurance. She knew her journey was just beginning, and the challenges ahead would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But one thing was certain. She would face them with the same grace and determination that had brought her this far. The next morning, news of Clara's inheritance spread like wildfire. It started quietly at first, a few whispers among the staff who had overheard Eleanor speaking to Clara in the library. By breakfast, those whispers had reached the ears of the gala guests, who were still recovering from the lavish celebration. At first, no one believed it. How could someone as plain and unassuming as Clara suddenly become one of the wealthiest people in the world? It sounded like a ridiculous rumor, the kind of story people told to entertain themselves during idle moments. But as the day went on, details began to emerge. Reporters arrived at the mansion, eager to confirm the story. Lawyers and financial advisors appeared, carrying briefcases filled with documents that outlined the staggering extent of Jonathan Hartley's fortune. The evidence was undeniable. Clara was indeed the sole heir to billions of dollars worth of assets. The revelation sent shockwaves through the elite circles, turning what had been mockery into disbelief. And then, almost instantly, into envy. Back in her small cottage, Clara tried to make sense of everything that had happened. She had returned, home early that morning, unable to stay at the mansion any longer. The weight of the news felt too heavy to bear, and she needed time alone to think. Sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by the familiar sights and smells of her simple life, she stared at the stack of papers Eleanor had given her. They contained information about properties, investments, and legal responsibilities. Things Clara had never imagined herself dealing with. For the first time in years, she felt completely out of her depth. Her neighbors noticed something was different when they saw her later that afternoon. Clara usually greeted everyone with a smile and a wave, but today she seemed distracted, lost in thought. When Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who lived next door, knocked on her door to borrow some sugar, she found Clara sitting quietly by the window, staring out at the garden. "Are you all right, dear?" Mrs. Thompson asked, concern evident in her voice. Clara nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine," she said. "Just thinking." Mrs. Thompson didn't press further. Instead, she left the sugar on the counter and gave Clara a gentle pat on the shoulder before heading back to her own house. Clara appreciated the gesture but knew she couldn't share the truth. Not yet. How could she explain to people who had known her for years that she was now richer than anyone in town combined? Would they treat her differently? Would their kindness turn into resentment or greed? As the days passed, Clara struggled to adjust to her new reality. Every morning, she woke up expecting things to go back to normal, only to remember the enormity of what had changed. Calls flooded in from lawyers, accountants, and public relations teams offering their services. Journalists camped outside her cottage, hoping to catch a glimpse of her or get an exclusive interview. Even strangers showed up, claiming to be distant relatives or old friends, all asking for favors or handouts. Clara turned them away politely, unsure how to navigate this sudden influx of attention. Meanwhile, the elites who had laughed at her just days earlier scrambled to reconnect. Richard, who had mocked her mercilessly at the gala, sent her a bouquet of expensive flowers with a note apologizing for his behavior. Others followed suit, sending gifts and invitations to exclusive events. Some even visited her personally, pretending to be concerned about how she was handling the pressure of her newfound wealth. Clara listened to their apologies and accepted their gifts graciously, though she couldn't help but notice the insincerity behind their words. These were the same people who had dismissed her as insignificant, and now they wanted to befriend her because of her money. Despite the chaos, Clara refused to let it change who she was. She continued living much as she always had, tending to her garden, cooking meals for herself, and helping her neighbors whenever they needed assistance. Her modest lifestyle stood in stark contrast to the opulence expected of someone with her wealth, which only added to the intrigue surrounding her. People marveled at her ability to remain grounded despite her circumstances, though not everyone approved. Some criticized her choices, saying she wasn't taking full advantage of her fortune. Others accused her of being naive, warning her that she would eventually regret staying in such a humble setting. One person who did take a genuine interest in Clara's situation was Thomas Whitmore. Unlike the others, he didn't bombard her with requests or false flattery. Instead, he reached out to offer guidance, inviting her to meet with him privately to discuss how she could manage her estate responsibly. Clara agreed, sensing that he truly wanted to help rather than exploit her. During their meeting, Thomas explained the complexities of managing large sums of money and advised her to assemble a trusted team of professionals to assist her. He also encouraged her to use her wealth to support causes she cared about, reminding her that true fulfillment came from making a positive impact on the world. Inspired by his advice, Clara began exploring ways to give back. She donated a portion of her fortune to build schools in underserved areas, funded scholarships for children who couldn't afford education, and provided resources to struggling farmers in her community. Word of her generosity spread quickly, earning her admiration. From people far beyond her small town, letters poured in from individuals whose lives she had touched, thanking her for her kindness and expressing hope that others would follow her example. While many praised Clara for her actions, not everyone was pleased. Some of the elites grew bitter, resenting the fact that someone they had once ridiculed was now receiving widespread acclaim. Richard, in particular, struggled to come to terms with the situation. He had always prided himself on his wealth and status, believing it made him superior to others. Seeing Clara rise above him, not through arrogance or competition but through humility and compassion, left him feeling insecure and angry. He tried to undermine her efforts, spreading rumors that she was reckless with her money or using her philanthropy as a way to gain popularity. But his attempts fell flat. Most people saw through his bitterness and admired Clara even more for rising above his pettiness. Through it all, Clara remained steadfast in her values. She understood that wealth brought challenges, but she refused to let it define her. Instead, she focused on using her resources to create meaningful change, determined to honor her uncle's wishes. Each decision she made was guided by the lessons her parents had taught her: hard work, humility, and kindness. Though her life had changed dramatically, she held on to the belief that true happiness came not from material possessions, but from the connections we forge and the good we do for others. As months turned into years, Clara's influence grew. Her projects transformed communities, providing opportunities for countless people to improve their lives. She became a symbol of hope and resilience, proving that greatness wasn't measured by titles or bank accounts but by character and action. The elites who had once scorned her were forced to confront their own shortcomings, while those who had doubted her strength learned to admire her quiet determination. And Clara, for her part, never forgot where she came from, or the simple joys that had brought her peace long before money entered the picture. Years passed, and Clara's life continued to evolve in ways she could never have imagined. Though her wealth had brought her fame and influence, she remained deeply connected to the values that had shaped her from childhood. Her days were no longer spent tending to her garden alone. Instead, she traveled across the country, meeting with communities in need and working with organizations dedicated to improving lives. Yet despite her busy schedule, she always found time to return to her cottage, where the familiar sights and sounds of her hometown reminded her of who she truly was. Her generosity became legendary, inspiring countless people to rethink their priorities. Schools built with her funding flourished, giving children access to education they might otherwise have missed. Farmers struggling to make ends meet received tools, seeds, and training, allowing them to grow crops more efficiently and sustainably. Even small acts of kindness, like paying hospital bills for families facing financial hardship or sponsoring local events, left a lasting impact on those around her. Clara didn't seek recognition for her work, but word of her efforts spread far and wide, earning her respect and admiration from people of all walks of life. The elites, however, struggled to reconcile their feelings about Clara. Some, genuinely, changed their attitudes inspired by her example to use their own resources for good. They began donating to causes they cared about, volunteering their time and advocating for social change. Others, though, couldn't shake their resentment. Richard, in particular, remained bitter, unable to accept that someone he had once dismissed as insignificant now commanded so much attention and praise. He tried to downplay her achievements, claiming that anyone with billions could do what she did. But his words rang hollow, especially when even his closest friends started questioning his motives. One day, while attending a charity event hosted by Thomas Whitmore, Clara crossed paths with Richard again. The two hadn't spoken since the gala years earlier, and the tension between them was palpable. Richard approached her hesitantly, holding a glass of wine in one hand. "Clara," he said, forcing a smile, "you've certainly made a name for yourself." Clara turned to face him, her expression calm but guarded. "Hello, Richard. It's been a long time." "Yes, it has," he replied, shifting uncomfortably. After a brief pause, he added, "I just wanted to say, I admire what you've done. You've accomplished a lot." His words surprised Clara. She studied him carefully, searching for any hint of sarcasm or insincerity. When she found none, she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means a lot." Richard seemed relieved by her response, as if he had been dreading this moment for years. "Honestly, I wasn't sure how you'd react," he admitted. "After everything that happened at the gala, well, let's just say I wasn't exactly kind to you." "No, you weren't," Clara agreed, her tone gentle but firm. "But we all make mistakes. What matters is whether we learn from them." Her reply caught Richard off guard. For a moment he looked as though he might argue, but then he sighed and lowered his gaze. "You're right," he said quietly. "I was wrong about you, Clara, about a lot of things. And I'm sorry." Clara smiled faintly, touched by his honesty. "Apology accepted," she said. "We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward." Their conversation marked a turning point not only for Richard, but for many others who had doubted Clara. Seeing him humble himself encouraged others to reflect on their own behavior and consider how they treated those less fortunate than themselves. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. People started valuing character over wealth, kindness over status, and integrity over appearances. Despite the positive changes she inspired, Clara faced challenges of her own. Managing such an immense fortune came with complications, legal disputes, attempts to exploit her generosity, and constant scrutiny from the media. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, wondering if she had made the right choices. But, whenever doubt crept in, she reminded herself why she had chosen this path. Her uncle Jonathan had trusted her to honor his legacy, and she refused to let him or herself down. To stay grounded, Clara leaned on the support of her neighbors and friends. Mrs. Thompson, who had always been there for her, became a close confidant, offering advice and encouragement whenever Clara needed it. Other townsfolk, too, rallied around her, reminding her of the simple joys that had brought her happiness before her life changed forever. Together, they celebrated milestones, shared meals, and laughed over old memories, proving that true connections couldn't be bought or sold. As time went on, Clara's story became a beacon of hope for future generations. Books were written about her journey, highlighting how humility and compassion could transform not only individual lives, but entire communities. Teachers used her example to teach students the importance of empathy and generosity. Artists painted murals of her in public spaces, capturing her quiet strength and unwavering determination. Though she shied away from the spotlight, Clara understood that her actions had sparked something bigger than herself, a movement toward a kinder, more inclusive world. Even as her fame grew, Clara continued prioritizing the things that mattered most. She visited schools she had helped build, sitting with students and listening to their dreams. She walked through fields alongside farmers, learning about their struggles and successes. She attended weddings, funerals, and festivals in her town, showing up not because she had to, but because she wanted to. These moments reminded her that wealth, no matter how vast, paled in comparison to the richness of human connection. One evening, as she sat on the porch of her cottage watching the sunset, Clara reflected on how far she had come. Her life had taken twists and turns she could never have predicted, yet through it all she had stayed true to herself. The elites who had once laughed at her were now humbled by her example, while the ordinary people she had sought to help had become her greatest allies. Her journey had taught her that real worth wasn't measured by material possessions, but by the love and respect we give and receive from others. And so, Clara's story served as a timeless reminder that greatness isn't defined by titles, bank accounts, or societal approval. It's found in the courage to stand up for what's right, the willingness to extend a helping hand, and the grace to forgive those who misunderstand us. In the end, it wasn't her billions that made Clara extraordinary, it was her heart. As decades passed, Clara's legend grew even stronger. Her name became synonymous with kindness, humility, and resilience. People from all corners of the world shared her story, passing it down to their children and grandchildren as a lesson in what it truly meant to live a meaningful life. Schools named buildings after her, charities adopted her philosophy of giving back, and leaders cited her example when advocating for social change. Yet despite the widespread recognition, Clara never sought glory or fame. She continued living, quietly, letting her actions speak louder than any words ever could. Her cottage, once a modest home hidden at the edge of a sleepy village, became a symbol of hope. Visitors came from far and wide to see the place where she had lived before her life changed forever. They marveled at its simplicity, the wooden beams, the wildflowers blooming in the garden, the old rocking chair on the porch. To them, it represented something profound. That true happiness didn't come from luxury or extravagance, but from finding joy in the little things. Many left inspired, vowing to embrace a simpler, more purposeful way of life. Clara welcomed these visitors warmly, sharing stories about her childhood, her parents' teachings, and the values that had guided her throughout her journey. She often spoke about how her Uncle Jonathan's unexpected gift had challenged her to think deeply about responsibility and legacy. "Money is just a tool," she would say. "It can build walls or bridges. It's up to us to decide." Her wisdom resonated with people of all ages, from young students dreaming of making a difference to elderly individuals reflecting on their own lives. Though Clara remained active in her philanthropy, she also made time for herself. Each morning, she rose early to tend to her garden, planting seeds and pulling weeds as she had done for years. These quiet moments brought her peace, grounding her amidst the whirlwind of attention her life had become. She cherished the routine, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of nature. Sometimes neighbors joined her, helping with the harvest or simply enjoying her company. Together they laughed over shared memories and dreamed of new ways to improve their community. One crisp autumn morning, Clara received a letter that caught her by surprise. It was an invitation to speak at a global conference dedicated to addressing poverty and inequality. The organizers praised her work and expressed their belief that her message could inspire millions. At first, Clara hesitated. She had always preferred working behind the scenes, avoiding the limelight whenever possible. But after much thought and encouragement from friends like Mrs. Thompson, she decided to accept. If her words could help others, she reasoned, then it was worth stepping out of her comfort zone. The day of the conference arrived, and Clara stood nervously backstage as thousands of people filled the auditorium. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and attendees whispered excitedly about the woman who had transformed lives without seeking recognition. When her name was called, Clara walked onto the stage, dressed in her usual simple attire. The crowd erupted into applause, rising to their feet in admiration. For a moment she felt overwhelmed, but then she remembered why she was there, to share her story not for herself but for those who needed hope. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "I'm honored to be here today, though I must admit I don't consider myself extraordinary. I'm just someone who believes in doing what's right, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem." She went on to recount her journey, speaking candidly about the challenges she had faced and the lessons she had learned along the way. She talked about the importance of staying true to oneself, even when the world tries to pull you in different directions. She emphasized the power of kindness, urging everyone to look beyond appearances and recognize the humanity in others. And she reminded them that wealth, whether financial or emotional, was meant to be shared, not hoarded. When she finished speaking, the audience sat in stunned silence before erupting into thunderous applause. Many wiped away tears, moved by her sincerity and conviction. Journalists rushed to interview her afterward, but Clara politely declined, saying she had said everything she needed to say. Instead, she spent the rest of the day meeting with delegates and listening to their ideas for creating a better future. By the end of the event, countless lives had been touched, including her own. Back home, Clara returned to her quiet routine, grateful for the experience but relieved to leave the chaos behind. Life resumed its peaceful pace, punctuated by visits from friends and occasional trips to oversee her charitable projects. Though her health began to decline with age, she remained active, determined to make every moment count. Even in her final years, she continued inspiring those around her, proving that strength wasn't measured by physical ability, but by the courage to keep going. When Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep one winter night, the world mourned her loss. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe, celebrating the woman who had redefined greatness through her humility and love. Her funeral was attended by both ordinary citizens and prominent figures, united in their grief and gratitude. As they laid her to rest beside her parents in the village cemetery, a single wildflower crown rested atop her coffin, a final nod to the beauty and simplicity she had always cherished. In the years that followed, Clara's legacy endured. Her charitable foundations continued thriving, expanding their reach to touch even more lives. Schools taught her story as part of their curriculum, ensuring that future generations would carry forward her values. Artists painted murals of her face on city walls, musicians composed songs in her honor, and writers penned novels inspired by her journey. But perhaps most importantly, individuals everywhere began striving to emulate her spirit, choosing compassion over judgment, action over apathy, and connection over division. And so, Clara's story lived on, not just as a tale of wealth and transformation, but as a testament to the enduring power of character. In a world often consumed by materialism and superficiality, she had shown that true greatness lay in the heart. Her life served as a reminder that we are all capable of making a difference, regardless of our circumstances. All it takes is a willingness to care, to give, and to believe in the goodness within ourselves and others. Clara may have left this world, but her impact remained, etched into the hearts of those who dared to follow her example.